Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello again for another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast. This week I am joined by Doug and Denis. Dirk was unable to join us. He had a family commitment and couldn't make it. This is episode number 47 of Season 3. We go back to South Dakota in April of 2015, where a volunteer firefighter died at a house fire with a fire in the basement. This is a could happen anywhere in North American rural fire, so that's kind of why I did it. We reviewed the NIOSH report and we discussed what happened, and a new thing we have added to this episode is a virtual 360, where we describe in detail what the scene and structure looked like to help paint a picture in your mind of the size-up. Whether or not the size-up was done in the initial incident, you will kind of know what the building and the conditions looked like. Now, let's bring in Doug and Denis. How's it going, guys?
Great.
What's happening in Nova Scotia?
Well, Thursday it started snowing.
It's got snow here too.
And then it continued to snow, and then it continued to snow, and then it started to rain, and then it started to blow. And I woke up this morning and most of the snow had been pretty well watered down. So, and it's a little more Marchish now, even if it is April.
Perfect. Well, we're getting snow too, down in some parts of Alberta anyway, mainly in the south, but yeah. And Doug, how are you?
I'm good. There's also snow here as of this morning, so that's making me just like you two, I suppose.
Yeah. Country,
started some days off today and hanging out with the family, and yeah, everything's good. Did the big $400 Costco trip this morning, which is always fun to do.
Hey, that's not bad for Costco. That's pretty decent. Yeah.
And what did you buy that you didn't need?
We nothing. That's the thing. Every time you go, you buy the one or two things that are like, oh, these diapers will last for 2 months.
Yeah.
But then next time it's the wipes, and then next time it's the whatever. So every time it's still a $400 trip.
I feel your pain.
But at least the hot dogs are only $1.50 still.
Still, yeah. Apparently that's the thing that the owner said is they're not going to change. Yeah. It's always $1.50.
Yeah, but what's changed here is you got to order it, take a number, wait for them to call your name, and then go get it. Like, when did that happen?
It used to be in a cart.
The nice thing about shift work, right, is I can go there when everybody else is at work, and I don't have to wait in lines for anything.
Yeah. We were going to go this morning, but it was too snowy, so we decided not to. So, retired people, we can change our plans. So, a few current events that have happened since our last episode, of course. The big one everybody knows about was the bridge collapse due to a ship impact in Baltimore. That was pretty interesting to watch and learn from. And the most interesting part of that was either Doug or Dirk sent me the audio, the fire department audio, which I've had trouble finding on YouTube. I had to keep the copy you sent me because I can't seem to pull up the exact one on YouTube. But anyway, the audio is very interesting to listen to, especially the differences from the 2021 triple fatal that Baltimore City had, where incident command was cited as a primary problem especially in the rescue part, not really in the response part, but in the rescue part, where the incident commander was overwhelmed and he had 20-some direct reports at the time during the incident, and the other chiefs came and he didn't establish divisions or groups or branches, and people were freelancing and didn't call mutual aid, etc. And then when you listen to the bridge collapse audio, the IC was like on his game. And textbook. He was a textbook. It was textbook. That's exactly what I said. It was textbook. In fact, I was teaching an ICS 200 and 300 course that week, and we used 10, 12 minutes of that audio to show the students, and even the students picked up on it. So that was really, really cool. I don't know if you guys had thoughts on it beyond that.
Well, we've all been to incidents that weren't managed well. There's no doubt about that. So it's not that difficult to recognize an incident that isn't managed well. What's difficult sometimes is to understand the nuances of when things are not being managed well, if they're being managed fairly well. But I thought that one there shone pretty well and saved lives.
Yeah, it was great.
I think almost anybody involved in that whole incident did a very good job and saved lives. I mean, right from the pilot on the ship realizing there was an issue and radioing the whatever they call it, the port authority, who got the bridge
Anytime.
shut down and stopped traffic. And it's tragic they couldn't get the construction workers off and 6 of them lost their life, but it could have been a lot worse. And then yeah, like we say, up to the fire department response and all the mutual aid and and you got to remember, like I woke up that morning and saw it on the news and said, "Oh,
Yep.
well, but like they went at 1:30 in the morning in pitch black conditions and were dispatched to a water rescue. Nothing about a giant ship just took down a bridge. Just there's a water rescue, which is a little low frequency, high risk, but this was the ultimate low frequency, high risk. Right up to like the first engine arriving, driving down the road, and probably hit the brakes. The road's gone. Like the road's gone.
Yeah.
And
Gordon Graham would be proud
yeah,
of you.
yeah,
Slow down.
yeah, for sure. So I think,
Excellent.
yeah, and listening to all that audio and like you say, the staging and the mutual aid and the forward thinking, and I even remember he made a comment to dispatch like, send me the other squad companies and relocate SOC companies into the city from outlying areas. So it's nice to see, I guess, a little bit of progress from Baltimore and learning from some of their tragic events so that things don't happen in the future.
Exactly. That was great. I know. Really good. Actually, the pilot, the radio didn't work on the ship because the power was out. He grabbed his cell phone and he phoned the harbor master and said, "Shut that bridge down." And apparently he saved 20 to 30 cars that were on ready to go. They stopped that lined up during that time from loss of power to impact and failure of the bridge, which was really cool.
The one thing that some people listening to that audio, if you do get a chance to listen to it, might question was, and Doug put his finger on it, it says, the information that was passed through dispatch and transmitted out to the guys says basically, somebody in the water, water rescue. And you might be looking at that, and it's several iterations of conversations with dispatch before actually the conversation comes around to what's really happening. And people might be wondering why that is. And my thinking on that is that it's because there was nothing in CAD that said ship into the bridge. And so you had to pick something on CAD, and that's essentially what you transmitted.
Yeah.
So I
Car in the
suspect
water.
that had something to do with it. That's what I suspect.
And it matters how information. It's like the game of telephone, right? You all tell somebody something, and by the end, it's completely different. Well, who knows how the pilot called the harbor master, the harbor police, I'm assuming, called the fire department. The dispatcher had to put something in CAD and tell the companies, so the message could have been filtered. And you're not ready as a dispatcher to be like, "Hello, 911," and oh yeah, this ship just knocked a bridge down. That's not even something that like registers in your mind. So, and like, yeah, it might have just been, but even the verbal update that dispatch gives them is, I think, like, there's a car in the water, maybe a boat, maybe hit the bridge, but the first in companies didn't know the bridge wasn't there because you hear them get there and say, the bridge is gone, the whole thing is gone. And even later, companies that were supposed to come in from one direction but had been told go the other way kind of questioned, like, why do we have to go the long way? Is the bridge closed? And dispatch said, the bridge isn't closed, the bridge is gone. Like, it's completely gone. Which,
In the
like,
harbor.
yeah, you don't think that bridges fail like that, right? Like, I remember in recruit class when they were talking about for anchoring for like a technical rescue call, and they'd say, well, pick something bomb proof,
Yeah.
like a bridge. And somebody said, well, World War II proved that bridges are not bomb proof. And oh yeah, I guess that's true. So, but like but you think a bridge is pretty solid, right? It takes a building floating down the river to knock it over, which is essentially
tell
what
the
happened.
engineer that bridges aren't solid.
Yeah, yeah.
What do they call this bridge? It was a
Tacoma Narrows.
No, they had a name for this bridge. The type
It's
of
a
bridge.
truss bridge. It's a
It was.
truss bridge.
No, I know, but the Department of Transportation said it was one of the 17,000 single point of failure type bridges that one piece fails and the whole thing might come
Yeah,
down.
the whole
And
thing.
there's 17,000 of them in the United States or something. It was on their list.
There's one in Quebec City.
Yeah, it already fell a couple times before it got held up by the last bolt.
Yeah, the old
Good.
Quebec Bridge.
Well, we killed that one to death. There's also been quite a few fatal apparatus accidents lately in the last couple of weeks, which is very unfortunate. Some drive-intos and some rollovers, people ejected. So, as Gordon Graham would say, slow down. You got to get there in one piece. That's the number one priority of ICS is you need to be there to help the others.
All right. So also the Quebec Workplace Safety Board came out with a report on those two Quebec firefighters who died trying to do a rescue in a flood last year in 2023. And we should talk about water rescues on one of our tailboards because there's lots of stuff to talk about in that area.
Yeah, and I want to do the Montreal one that was in October. I've got it slated for October of this year to do the Montreal fatal water rescue that happened. I have the report from the coroner, and I'd
In the
like to
rack.
get that other report. I don't know how we get that other report that's been referred to in some articles, but I haven't actually got a link to the report about these two firefighters that were doing a water rescue in an Argo with an outboard on the back. In their turnout gear, not wearing PFDs because it wouldn't go over their turnout gear, et cetera, et cetera. But we can do a tailboard on it as well.
Sad, actually.
Yeah, and we're getting ready for wildfire season coming up here. Got it, 57 wildfires burning in Alberta. I saw they have a big one out of control somewhere in BC this morning. I saw a note.
They're going to start a new wildfire college in BC. I saw that announcement yesterday, right?
Oh, is that right? Okay.
It's going to be a national college. There's a couple institutions getting together to put it together, and I think they're looking for ideas right now, as a matter of fact. So
interesting, cool.
I think it's really necessary because there needs to be a place where they could standardize that training and support it.
I mean, Alberta, every province has their own wildfire college, and I saw in that webinar that we took the other day, the feds are giving a bunch of money to support wildfire training, but I don't know who they give it to because the feds don't have any firefighters. So I'm not sure where that goes.
Yeah.
But.
And I think it's overstating it to say that every province has a college for wildfire.
Oh, maybe.
That's I think part of the genesis of this new educational institute is because it's not well supported across the country.
Cool. I know I've taught at the one in Alberta here. It's in Hinton. Yeah.
I want to know when Denis starting his new job as the Halifax wildfire manager.
It's been awarded already.
Yeah,
they missed Denis' application.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he must have forgot to check a certain box on the application or something.
Yeah, going for fire chief of Halifax.
I'm retired. That box.
That's only a temporary thing. You're only retired if you want to be.
Yeah.
Still working lots, but retired. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, enough sense.
Okay. We better get into the episode here. We'll be here all afternoon. Doug's kids will wake up and start bugging him for food. On this week's incident, April 12th, 2015, a 38-year-old male volunteer firefighter died in a floor collapse while working above a residential basement fire. The thing that struck me about this, and I wrote it in my notes here, is that this is an anywhere in North America house. It's a standard wooden construction, vinyl sided house that we see anywhere in Alberta, in North America, really. And it's a rural fire service, very much like, rural fire services all around North America. So it really strikes me home when I see these going like, this could happen here, kind of thing. The fire department was part of a county fire service consisting of 13 volunteer fire departments, not unlike what we see. There was one career fire department, and there was 3 public service agencies or organizations. The Office of Emergency Management assists the response and recovery of activities of these departments and organizations involved in providing emergency services. The Office of Emergency Management is the principal source of information on emergency management, including identification of training needs and developing and providing training programs. The Office of Emergency Management, this is in South Dakota, by the way, South Dakota. The Office of Emergency Management also assists all county agencies in obtaining surplus government equipment, such as vehicles, tools, etc. The county's Fire Chiefs Association. I wish we had something like that in Canada where you could get surplus government equipment, but it just goes to auction, I think. Or we keep it for so long that it's not worth anything by the time it's done. The county's Fire Chief Association was created in '68 to coordinate and assist efforts of the fire departments across the county. The association coordinates the initial fire service training for new members and provides dedicated training officer to assist departments in finding and establishing training programs. The county's fire service serves a population of approximately 185,000 in an area of 814 square miles. Mutual aid agreements are a key component of the success of the county's fire service. The county has been progressive in establishing radio policies, training opportunities, and financial support. The district volunteer fire department, where the fire occurred, was established in 1958 and currently has about 25 active members and is set up to have up to 40 certified firefighters on their roster, which probably suffering like everywhere else, not being able to get people. About a third of them are EMTs, and they serve a community of about 9,000 people covering 5.37 square miles. They operate out of one station with 2 rescue trucks, 2 engines, and 2 wildland trucks, 2 tenders, and a command vehicle, and an all-terrain vehicle. The department trains first and third Monday of every month. They attend state fire schools and have been the host site for the state fire school. They also provide mutual aid for the other 5 fire departments in the area. The mutual aid fire department that had the fatality was established in 1898, so it's been around forever. So it was a mutual aid department that actually suffered the fatality, responding to the initial department's call. It operates out of one station, 30 active members, serves a population of 1,700 people, so it's a much smaller district for population, covering 56 square miles. They have 2 engines, 2 tenders, 2 wildland trucks, and a rescue truck. The state of South Dakota does not have prerequisite training or education requirements for an individual to be a firefighter, same as Alberta, same as Saskatchewan. The state fire marshal's office, same as Nova Scotia. The State Fire Marshal's Office assists fire departments via the State Fire Service Training Program, which coordinates training for the State Fire School, District Fire Schools, National Fire Academy courses, and other special training. The program provides for the certification of firefighters, instructors, apparatus operators, and fire officers through certified training programs. The Fire Service Training Program is also a resource for training materials. So it's not unlike a lot of rural North America where it's kind of on your own and you, like most places, do their due diligence, but it's not a requirement. Alberta doesn't even have a fire act, so it's really up to us. I think CTV did a special on that a couple of years ago. The Canmore chief, Lance Bushi, put a bunch of talk into that one, which was good.
Structure involved was a ranch-style single-family home with a 2-car attached garage, which was built in 1994. The ground floor accounted for 1,759 square feet of living space, and most of the basement had been finished to add another 1,500 square feet. The home was a wood frame construction on a concrete block foundation. The exterior was vinyl siding with brick and brick veneer. The roof was a gabled 2-inch by 6-inch rafters with OSB sheathing covered with asphalt shingles. The interior was drywall with carpet and vinyl flooring. Natural gas was used for the forced air furnace and hot water heater, which shared a single-walled metal chimney pipe. One thing I want to say is I think as a fire service, we should get away from saying single-family home on our size-ups and things like that. Because I think a lot of quote-unquote single-family homes nowadays have way more than one single family living in them. And it gives you a predisposition that there's only 4 or 5 people in there. Or if you can say I know fire departments that just call them private dwellings as opposed to a multiple dwelling or something like that.
Detached.
There could be 10, 15 people living in some of these houses. And I know a lot of people that are other cultures that move here often have a few families living in one house.
Yeah, for sure. I think you even had one in Halifax, didn't we, where there was a six fatalities or something?
Seven.
Seven fatalities in a detached home.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more of that. Yeah, as it's expensive to own homes and people are moving here and whatever reason.
I think Doug's point is good. I would prefer these to be called detached family residence, yep, as opposed to semi-detached or multiples. So it's a more consistent way of talking about that. And you don't want to understate the risk, that's for sure.
On April 12th, 2015, the county dispatched the local volunteer fire department, a neighboring volunteer fire department, the county emergency management, and a medic unit for a residential structure fire with a person trapped inside. 9 minutes from the time of dispatch, the incident commander requested 2 additional mutual aid volunteer fire departments.
So we're gonna try adding something new this time, and maybe if it works out well, we'll do this into the future. Um, we, we find that maybe it's helpful when listening to the podcast to understand what the first arriving IC could have, or maybe in some of the exterior details, should have noticed on arrival. And we're going to call this little segment our virtual 360 because we're not actually there. We're with the benefit of hindsight. But not all of these reports that are the basis for the podcast mention 360-degree size ups being done by the first arriving IC. Um, but you're fortunate in the podcast that we can actually do that for you, in part with the benefit of hindsight. And we're hoping that it assists in understanding the actions described later in the podcast. It can be a little bit disorienting if you don't have the initial view. So the dispatch reported at 22:09 hours announced a non-responsive person trapped inside and a fire in the basement. On arrival, the first-in officer would have seen a 63-foot long by 32-foot deep single-story rancher-style bungalow with a typical low-peaked roof. No basement was visible on the alpha side, and the alpha side faced north. That's important because there will be some compass directions later on with the activities. Looking from the right to the left on the alpha side, he would have seen a two-car garage attached that protruded from the front of the house, about half the garage depth, and this was in the alpha delta quadrant. There was smoke showing from the garage when they arrived. Next along was a small window which turned out to be in the laundry room, then further along a larger window which was in the dining room. Then there was the main entry door to the residence, which was accessed by a concrete porch and was up about 2.5 steps from the front walk. This door led into a main floor dining room that was separated by a half-height wall on the right. Once inside, to the left of the door was another door that went into a master bedroom. Straight ahead on the right was the stairway bulkhead to the basement, and the living room was beyond at the back of the house. So stepping back outside, next along the Alpha side, near the Alpha Bravo corner, was another small window which turned out to be the master bathroom. Turning the corner on the Bravo side, the ground fell away to reveal a two-pane lookout window in a half-buried basement. We say lookout as to opposed to a walkout, so it's a half basement basically. This window opened into a basement bedroom. Above you on the main floor, closer to the Charlie corner, there was a window into the master bedroom, a bigger window. Surrounding the Charlie Bravo corner onto the back of the house was another two-pane lookout window in the basement on the Charlie side, pretty near the corner, with a larger window above it that went into the master bedroom on the main floor. Walking further along the Charlie side, there was a single-pane basement window, about another 10 feet further than the last one. Both of these basement windows opened into a large family room in the basement. The basement here was still partially below grade, and there was no access door that led directly into the basement from the exterior. Above the small basement window, you would have seen a larger living room window on the main floor, and this window was pretty much in line with the Alpha side entrance door. Halfway along the Charlie side, the ground started to slope upwards again, and a deck was located just a couple of feet above ground level that provided access through a sliding patio doors to the main floor kitchen. Walking along, you will have noticed that there were two small windows in the basement. One was under the deck, and the next one was further along a little bit as you approach the Charlie Delta corner. Both of these were likely in window wells. Looking at the plans later, you'd have found that one was a computer room and another one was a bedroom, actually. On the main floor, there were two bedrooms in the Charlie Delta quadrant, and they were both provided with small windows. So rounding the corner to the Delta side, you're again walking back up at ground level that's level with the main floor level. So the basement's completely underground again. There are no windows at all on the Delta side, no doors except for one that was at the back corner of the garage. And that's your tour around the building, that if you'd done your 360, this is what you would have noticed. So after the alarm, there was some apparatus and manning arrived, and I'm going to read those out to you so you'll have some idea of the timelines and the manning that was provided on this. So 2209 was dispatched, and at 2214, the fire chief was the first to arrive, and he assumed as the IC. At 2215, engine 2 arrived from the department, and on that was an officer and 4 firefighters. One of those firefighters would have been the pump operator. At 2215 also, there was a medic unit, 931 medic, that arrived with 2 medics. At 2217, so we are now, the alarm was at 2209. So then engine 1 arrived, and engine 1 had an officer and 3 firefighters, one of whom would have been the pump operator, and 2 probationary firefighters. And at the same time, a mutual aid engine 1, which is confusing now, there's 2 engine 1s. So one was engine 1 of the home department, the other one was a mutual aid engine 1. It arrived and it had only 2 firefighters on it, one of whom would have been the operator. At 2219, Rescue 1 arrived with 4 firefighters. At 2221, Wildland Fire truck arrived with 2 firefighters. Also, congruent with that, another wildland truck arrived with 2 firefighters and 2 more probationary firefighters. So just in case you're keeping track, by 2221 on scene there were 3 officers, 17 firefighters, 4 probationaries, and 2 EMS people on scene at that time. At 2235, which is what is that, Paul? 28 minutes, 27 minutes after the fire, there was a mutual aid tender arrived with 2 firefighters, and then another tender arrived with 2 firefighters, tankers for those of us who call them tankers. And then there was more mutual aid rescue trucks and wildland fire trucks arrived, and pretty much everything was on site by around about 2238. And so total on site at the end of this was 3 officers, 26 firefighters, 4 probationers, and 2 EMS personnel.
I like the totals. I should add that to the chart. That's a good idea. One of the pet peeves Doug and I. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So there was some pretty good staffing eventually on this scene.
Yeah, the one of the pet peeves Doug and I have is regional fire services or county-wide or whatever you want to call them, where their truck numbering is not standardized across the region. And so everybody's got a rescue 1 and a rescue 2 and a tender 1 and a pumper 1. And it's just, we tried to get that through here in the region that we used to be on here in Lacombe County, but it never did fly, even though we tried it at the time, but it couldn't push it through because everybody wanted to be engine 50 or squad 51. I don't know where that comes from, but.
And it makes it even worse when you both have a rescue 1, but they're not the same thing.
Yep. Okay, so during the initial entry into the structure, the firefighter was wearing his bunker coat, pants, gloves, hoods, helmet, self-contained breathing apparatus with an integrated personal alert safety system and a radio. The firefighter was found with his facepiece slightly misaligned on his face and his air cylinder empty, out of air. His gloves were not on his hands, but were found nearby, and his helmet was off his head with the chin strap underneath his chin, like he was trying to breathe. Yeah, trying to get his mask off because he was out of air. The old ones, we used to just take the hose off the regulator, but you can't do that anymore. The weather at the time was clear, 10-mile visibility. The temperature was 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Dennis Jones is going to give me heck for not converting this to Celsius for him. 27 degrees. The dew point was 27 degrees. Relative humidity was 35%. Wind speed was 16 miles per hour from the northwest. Since the wind speed was greater than 10, it may have assisted in the rapid fire growth once a flow path via horizontal ventilation was provided to the main living area of the residence. Good old wind. The caller had reported to dispatch that her father was inside the house and the fire was in the basement. The caller stated her father had taken sleeping pills and she wasn't able to get him out of the house.
So at 22:14 hours, the alarm time was 22:09, but at 22:14, as I'd mentioned earlier, the fire chief arrived on scene along with medic 931 and engine 2 a minute later. They were then informed that the male homeowner would be near the master bathroom, which was through the front door and through the first door on the left. Actually, the first door on the left led into the master bedroom. The chief assigned engine 2 as search and rescue. So the chief was on scene, and the first in engine, which is engine 2, was assigned to be search and rescue. And I remind you, there's an officer and 4 firefighters on that engine. The chief reported smoke coming from the garage and requested mutual aid from 2 additional mutual aid departments. So one was already on the way and 2 additional were asked for. So in total, there's 3 mutual aid plus the home department who are responding to this fire. The engine 2 officer told the 3 engine 2 firefighters to mask up. A local police officer was trying to force the door, and the engine 2 officer, who had an axe and a Halligan, forced the door. Heavy brown smoke was banked down to the floor. The engine 2 officer had pulled an 1 3/4 inch hose line to the door and ordered the operator to charge the line. Heavy brown smoke, Doug, what does that mean?
It means there's lots of fire inside.
Oxygen limited.
Yeah. At 22:17 hours, Engine 1 and Mutual Aid Engine 1 arrived as Engine 2 and Engine 2's crew made entry with the hose line. The fire chief assigned Engine 1 as the rapid intervention crew while en route. Engine 2 had problems with the initial hydrant, so the Engine 2 officer drove Engine 1 to the next hydrant, but had issues getting the cap off. Engine 2 got water salvaged at the initial hydrant.
At 22:19 hours, so 10 minutes after the call, Rescue 1 arrived on scene. The Engine 2 crew searched the bathroom, then heard erratic breathing, and later located the homeowner on the floor near the bed. Now, the bathroom is at one end of the bedroom, and the bed is at the other end of the bedroom. So what that doesn't tell you here is they actually went right around the bedroom. The crew tried to move him, but he was stuck, and their low air alarms were going off. The crew left the nozzle near the victim with the hose attached, and they met the Engine 1 crew at the door and told the crew to follow the hose line into the occupant.
The Engine 1 officer had 2 Engine 1 firefighters deploy another 1 3/4 hose line from Engine 2 as a backup at the door. The Engine 1 crew made entry doing a left-hand search in zero visibility. Engine 1 officer yelled to his crew to see if they were with him. The crew was not, so the Engine 1 officer returned to the front door. Once the one of the Engine 1 firefighters had a regular issue, so the officer had them wait at the master bedroom door before completing the search. The crew fixed the regulator issue and started a left-handed search, ending up in the bathroom. He made a second pass in the bathroom and crawled into the bathtub. He then continued his left-hand search. He made entry into the bedroom but didn't feel anybody, so he stopped and listened. He heard erratic breathing. Then, as an Engine 1 firefighter felt an arm and started pulling, but the occupant was stuck, he radioed command. He said he found the occupant, but he was low on air and needed assistance. The low air alarm sounded and Engine 1's crew exited the front door.
Although it says that the Engine 2 crew told the Engine 1 crew to follow the line, this narrative doesn't sound like that message got across.
Yeah, exactly.
They basically repeated everything the previous crew had done.
Yeah, for some reason, which I don't think it talks about that anywhere in the report. Rescue 1 had established a third crew at the door as the second crew exited. A positive pressure ventilation fan had been placed at the front door. Rescue 1 crew followed the hose line in and moved the occupant to the front door. Several firefighters carried the male occupant to the medic unit and continued CPR.
So at 22:32 hours, 20 minutes into the call, the second mutual aid volunteer fire department arrived with an officer and 2 firefighters, and this was at the time that the occupant was being taken to the medic unit. They noticed a PPV fan at the door, which we know was there, and that the windows on the A side had been ventilated. Fire had vented out of the Charlie Delta corner of the structure, which is where the garage, behind the garage, and the fire chief requested an interior attack crew. The first mutual aid volunteer fire department crew, with an 1.75-inch hose line, made entry through the dark, smoke-filled garage, which is on the Alpha Delta corner, and crawled into the laundry room, which is to the side of the garage. The second mutual aid fire department crew was assigned exterior suppression at the side A dining room windows. The second mutual aid fire department officer used a thermal imager through the windows and could see the dining and kitchen area. So it sounds like there might have been fire broken through somehow onto the main level if they were doing fire suppression through the window there.
Right, sort of a transitional attack kind of thing with guys in the garage and guys through the front windows trying to knock that fire down.
So this is the first indication, approaching a half hour into the call, that we know that water is being flowed. And so at approximately 22:37 hours, again approaching almost 30 minutes, County Emergency Management arrived on scene. The interior 3-man crew had made their way into the kitchen about 5 feet, I guess from the laundry room, when the third firefighter on the line yelled to get out. The room seemed to flash, causing a loud explosion, and then there was fire all around, and ceiling material started coming down on them. So this would be a ceiling leading into the attic. The third firefighter on the line jumped up and went left down the hallway, out of sight of the other 2 firefighters. Towards the front door is my assumption, but maybe not. The second firefighter switched with the nozzleman and hit the ceiling with water. The firefighters then followed the hose line out past the pickup truck, which was still in the garage. The third firefighter told the fire chief that he needed to get the pickup truck out of the garage. The 2 interior firefighters thought the third firefighter who had yelled, "Get out," had already made it out, and they thought that when they exited, they noticed his gear lying in the yard.
At 22:38 hours, the 3rd Mutual Aid Fire Department arrived at the staging area and started walking towards the fire scene. At 22:41 hours, the medic unit departed for the hospital with the occupant of the house. The 3rd Mutual Aid Fire Department reported to command and were told to have 3 of their firefighters operate the hose line on the Charlie side, and 2 firefighters, the Mutual Aid Fire Chief was one of the 2, on a hose line on the Alpha side for defensive operations. At approximately 22:43 hours, the fire chief ordered an evacuation and called for a Personnel Accountability Report, or a PAR. The 2 interior crew members who exited the garage grabbed a 2.5-inch hose line and flowed water through the laundry room window into the kitchen for about 5 minutes. PARs had been called, and everyone, including the Mutual Aid Fire Department's chief, reported everyone was accounted for, even though no one was able to positively locate the 3rd firefighter. Defensive operations on the Alpha and Charlie sides continued by several mutual aid fire departments.
After several firefighters had tried locating the missing firefighter, one of them even drove back to the fire station to see if he was there, he could not be accounted for. A crew had even made entry down to the basement via the interior stairs, which you would access through the front door, and were searching for the fire, but were driven back by heat, smoke, and water that had collected in the basement. So clearly they had put a fair amount of water in here. At 23:04 hours, the fire chief stopped suppression operations to look for the missing firefighter. So we're approaching an hour here, with 5 minutes off an hour. The initial mutual aid fire department members grabbed a chainsaw and went to the D side and cut a triangular hole in the wall up from the CD corner to look for and possibly locate the missing firefighter. So that would have given them access to the main floor, but not to the basement.
Yep. Right.
Fire was present in the collapsed floor joists. So the fire actually in that CD corner had collapsed, and they could see fire around the floor joists. Because remember, this was a basement fire as reported. In the basement area, a hose line was used to knock down that fire. Engine 1 officer had been doing a 360, searching the exterior and asking questions on the whereabouts of the missing firefighter. After the initial attack, fire members had finished cutting the exterior hole, and the Engine 1 officer inquired how far they had made it into the kitchen. Actually, it's a hallway from the back that leads behind the garage, behind the laundry room, to the kitchen. So the kitchen's half a house away. After the initial attack, crew members had finished cutting the exterior hole, and the officer and 2 other firefighters formed a rapid intervention crew. And with the fire chief's concurrence, they made entry through the garage. They advanced into the hallway looking into the kitchen and could see fire in a collapsed area of floor. The second mutual aid fire department officer was then using a thermal imager through the dining room window. He observed the Rick making entry to the kitchen. That would have been to his right as he was looking in. Heat was building up in the
left.
Looking in the dining room window, so the hallway comes up right. Yep. Heat was building up in the southwest corner of the structure, so the southwest corner would be the CD corner. And Engine 1 officer was concerned about a flashover, so the Rick backed out through the garage.
At 23:08 hours, the fire chief called for a second evacuation and resumed exterior attack. A second hole was cut on the Delta side exterior bathroom wall. The floor collapsed and the basement were visible through this hole. The fire was knocked down and water pumps were set up on the Bravo and Charlie sides to pump water out of the basement. At approximately 01:30 hours, a firefighter from the missing firefighters department was using a pole through the side D hole to move debris and noticed reflective trim on the missing firefighters' turnout gear. The local urban search and rescue team arrived on scene to shore up the structure so the firefighter could safely be removed. At approximately 09:37 hours, the firefighter's body was recovered. That's a pretty long time from 01:30 to 09:30, 8 hours before they could get him out.
Yeah, that's like you say, a long time. According to the state fire marshal's office, the cause of the fire was accidental. The origin of the fire was in the basement utility room, near the ceiling, around the exhaust vent pipe that served both the furnace and the hot water heater. Contributors to the significant fire behavior were the occupant had reported another occupant trapped and fire in the basement, which we knew, and they rescued him out of the bedroom. The occupant had delayed calling 911 by trying to get the other occupant out. Upon arrival, heavy smoke was coming out of the garage. Multiple attempts were tried to locate the non-responsive occupant in dark smoke with no water on the fire. It took 20 minutes to get the occupant out of the structure while the fire continued to grow. The PPV fan placed at the front door and windows were vented at the Bravo Charlie corner with winds of 16 miles per hour, possibly providing a low-pressure vent for fire in the basement. The fire vented at the southwest or Charlie Delta corner of the structure. That's where the fire was first coming out, was the garage door, so it made it alpha and then back to the
So the fire would have been
side.
at the back of the garage, below that in the utility room. That's where the fire was.
Yeah. The fire had vented. The flashover type fire was seen in the middle of the structure while crews were inside. The evacuation order was given and defensive operations. Obviously, many firefighter injuries and fatalities are the result of one or more contributing factors. NIOSH investigators identified the following items as key contributing factors of this incident that ultimately led to fatalities. First of all, the delay in notification to the fire department, the delay in fire suppression during rescue, The blood alcohol level was above the legal limit in the victim. There was a concealed basement fire. That part of the basement was underground, or some of it. Crew integrity was not followed. Self-contained breathing apparatus, operation and maintenance, and fireground communications, they found issues with both of those.
So recommendation 1 that came out of the investigation was that fire departments should ensure that a fire attack is conducted concurrently with rescue operations and that there's a risk versus gain analysis done after the rescue is completed. In other words, after your victim is removed or your occupant is removed, do you put firefighters into the structure at that point? So at any incident, of course, the life safety of civilians and firefighters is always the first priority, followed by incident stabilization, control the fire, and then property conservation, put the fire out. Firefighters are tasked with saving lives as their first priority when they arrive on the fire ground. A primary search is still a fundamental skill that firefighters perform, and we saw that the first 2 crews in did that. At this incident, the fire commander was informed that a civilian was in the home and of his general location. So it wasn't a blind search. They knew roughly where to look. A resident stated that there was a fire in the basement. The initial efforts were in rescuing the civilian, and that occurred before water suppression efforts were initiated. They did take a hose line in with them, but that's not where the fire was. The rescue was hindered by heavy dark smoke and the victim being caught on a piece of furniture. So not the victim, but the occupant. The use of a thermal imager may have assisted in locating the civilian. Additionally, the deployed hose line could have been used to cool the atmosphere, improving firefighter operations while searching for the civilian. The initial RIC, Rapid Intervention Crew, was deployed to help rescue the victim. Once the civilian was brought outside, an updated risk assessment needed to be done and a RIC needed to be established. I'm not sure I agree with every point in that recommendation.
Well, as I've stated on multiple episodes, I am a fan of uh, searching without a hose line, especially if you know there's a victim, and having a dedicated search and rescue company or crew assigned to that task. But the caveat is somebody else needs to go worry about the fire. And that's where this went bad is yes, you have a victim. Yes, you can go get them. Yes, that's our job. But I just looked back at the times that we read, and there was basically 3 engines and a chief and a rescue all on scene when this was happening. So even if you said this engine and the rescue or these 2 engines go get the person, there's still an engine that can go put the fire out. That's your job, not only putting the fire out, but you're protecting the crews that are searching for the person, and you're making the person you're searching for's environment maybe better for them. So it can't be one or the other. It shouldn't be fire attack and not rescue, and it shouldn't be rescue and not fire attack. It has to be both at the same time for things to go properly. And you should not be putting a PPV fan at the door and turning it on when you don't have water on the fire and the seat of the fire.
Yeah, control.
Open high, ventilate low, flow water.
Yep, I think we're all agreed there, which is why we do the podcast, so we can talk about this and spread
So
the
one
word.
of the things that I read back there was you could have used the hose line to cool the atmosphere. So it's pointless to flow water on smoke. It doesn't do much for you unless you're actually creating a ventilation path to push a hot atmosphere out of a space, right? But being aware that when you're doing that, there's a consequence to that. And the consequence is you're creating a flow path for the fire.
I think they're trying to say you should have had the second team or third team flowing water in the kitchen dining room area where the fire was coming through the floor or the back towards the bathroom, right? Because you had smoke coming out the garage, you had heavy brown smoke when they went in to find the guy. So I think that's kind of what they're trying to say is there should have been a line going.
We don't know that the fire had actually ruptured that main floor platform. I suspect not.
We don't know. Yeah,
but maybe.
I had a very similar fire to this in Rocky. Fortunately, there was no one in the building. We ended up, burning it down pretty well. Because we just couldn't get at it. We kept trying to go downstairs. We kept trying to get water in the basement, and we couldn't find it without. The structure became too weak, and we couldn't do any more.
Recommendation number 2 is fire department should ensure that officers and firefighters are trained in current basement fire strategies and tactics. Basement fires can be taxing and test a firefighter's knowledge and skill on how to combat them safely and effectively. Fire burning underneath floors can significantly degrade the floor system with little indication to firefighters working above. During this incident, firefighters were unable to access the basement. They opted not to ventilate the basement fire and were unaware of the fire load found within the basement. The use of a cellar nozzle like a Bresnan distributor or by putting hose lines through basement windows during the initial stages of the basement fire may have assisted in containing the fire and or allowing better operating conditions for firefighters to access the basement. Attempts were made to flow water on the first floor where fire had vented, but this effort was not successful. Firefighters should also recognize that fire venting through a floor is a late indication of a weakened floor system. I would think that fire coming through the floor means the floor is not intact, correct?
Yeah. I had another fire that was similar to this where we had a fire in the basement. Fortunately, everybody was out, and it took our guys 3 or 4 times flowing through windows and then flowing and pushing down the stairs to get a hold on the fire in the basement. It hadn't affected the floor system as much, luckily, so it was still good. And there was a doorway at the back that went right down the basement stairs. So they were able to go right down the basement stairs in an attack to knock the fire down while simultaneously fighting from a window on the Delta side. So that worked. But yeah, they should have put water in the basement if they were going to go in there.
Yeah, they
And
should
try
have
to
they
put
should have
this
put
out.
water in the basement from the basement, basically. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
or the
so
window.
to get to the basement, they would have had to come down the bulkhead door. But if the fire was as advanced as it appears to have been at that time, that they would have gone by the floor collapse or where the fire eventually vented. So that's a problem. But there was at least 3 basement windows that we're aware of, 4 and 5 if you count the 2 ones that were in wells at the back, which you would not probably have
Yeah,
seriously considered as a first choice. But that, in fact, is back where the fire was. It was back in that corner. And
yeah. So I'm thinking this firefighter ran. When they said get out, he ran towards the front door
that's what I
and
think
went through
happened
the
too.
floor. Yeah,
It's
into the
interesting they
basement.
mention a Bresnan distributor because I did some tests on Bresnan distributors, and there is an 1.5-inch hose line connected variety. And the best thing to do with that one is to put it in a display case because the amount of water that comes out of it is not worth talking about. So we finally settled on some 2.5-inch Bresnan distributors, which a lot of people in our listening audience probably don't even know what that is. You should you should look it up. You can still buy them. You can buy the ones that don't have the fog tips on them, but have smoothbore tips on them, and will actually flow a considerable amount of water if you buy the right one. However, a Bresnan distributor is only of value if you drop it through the floor directly over the fire. And in this case, I'm not sure they knew where the fire
Yeah,
was. And to get to this
yeah.
fire,
I
they would
think
have had to breach the back wall of the garage, get into the hallway behind the garage, breach the floor, and drop the distributor directly on top of the fire. I don't think they knew that that's necessarily where the fire was. So it's an
I
interesting
think
comment here um, that requires a lot of knowledge.
smoothbore into the basement, but that might not have done it because you couldn't get at where the fire was from an outside wall.
Correct.
Yeah, because there was no
Right.
window on the utilities room,
Right.
so right down the
And
stairs.
that's the hardest part of a basement fire is to get to the basement, you're going through the chimney of the fire. So, and that's the perfect time to use the flow and go and cool the atmosphere that you're about to enter. and try to battle your way down the stairs and then battle, like, it's a fight. I mean, that's why you're a firefighter. That's where you're fighting.
And the front door was the chimney, and the windows they took out.
The question is we both know that if you have a serious basement fire in a bungalow, at the end of the day, there's going to be a hole in the ground because they're going to come and tear the whole thing down. So the occupant who
That's right.
lived there
Yeah.
was removed. There was nobody else in the building besides firefighters. Why are you so concerned about putting the fire out at the risk of a firefighter's life? That's the question. So back to that risk versus gain analysis.
I think you could still make an attempt, though. I don't think you can just say the fire's in the basement, write it off, we're going to burn it down, big deal. But you can make an attempt, and if you're unsuccessful, as in any fire attack, if you're unsuccessful, it's when you have, that's the hardest decision you're ever going to make as an officer is, we're not winning, turn around, let's go, right?
Recommendation number 3. Fire department should ensure a zero-tolerance alcohol policy is established and enforced. Fire department should strictly prohibit any member of the fire department from responding to a call if they have been drinking. In this line of duty death, the firefighter who was deceased in the call was found to have an acute level of ethanol intoxication in his bloodstream that may have impaired his judgment and his motor skills.
So I have an interesting story because this is a hard one for some volunteer departments because they believe that alcohol is part of the camaraderie, and there are departments that are still struggling with this one. And I had an interesting conversation with a council member one time where I had brought in a strict non-alcohol policy, and we pulled it out of all the fire halls. And this was
Yep.
a lot of fire halls.
Been there, done that.
And
a lot
he
of problems.
basically was very angry with me, and he says, "What right do you have to tell tell the volunteer firefighters that they can't go and have a beer on a Friday night or a Saturday night, or have 2 beers and have friends over, or whatever?" He says, "What right do you have to tell them that they can no longer drink?" I says, "That's not at all what I'm saying." He says, you can do whatever they want, but what I am saying is when you decide to have that beer, you reach down and turn your pager off because you're not coming to the fire. Because you can drink all you want, but that means that you're not coming to the fire. Don't show up at my fire scene having been drinking. And I've had firefighters charged by the police for driving to fire scenes intoxicated. I've fired firefighters for driving to the scenes and being on the scenes for being intoxicated. It just has to be that way. Can you go to work, Doug, after drinking and or doing recreational drugs? No, you can't, because it's not safe.
Yeah, I had an incident where council and CAOs gave us all kinds of grief because we went to the fire station, and they were allowed to have one party in the fire station a year, Christmas time. And then, of course, we had appropriate on-call, other stations, all that kind of good stuff. And then they were supposed to take the alcohol out, and we discovered a bunch of alcohol. We got a complaint from a probationary firefighter that they were all in there drinking, and a fire call came in, and they went. And therefore, she thought, is that acceptable? And it's like, no. And so we pulled the booze out, and the chief and I got raked over the coals by council. Same kind of thing. It's like, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't make sense. I think there's less of it today, I'm hoping, or I just don't see it anymore.
But if you are the chief of a department that condones this, allows it, turns a blind eye, you are responsible. Any bad outcome, it's on you.
I'm not making excuses, but I do think it's tough on some volunteer departments that get 50 calls a year, that you're and have, typically those departments have way fewer members. So if you're all out on Friday night having a beer and that happens to be the night the fire happens, like, do you all not go? But especially,
well, that's where that on-call kind of system works well.
You're not going to have an on-call on a 15-member department that gets 50 calls a year, because being on call won't matter anyways, right? And it's hard because I completely agree that if you're drinking, you shouldn't go. I've had fire chiefs that came to a department that had a zero tolerance policy and said, well, we're not really we can't enforce that. But if you can't show up if you're over the legal limit, if you're under the legal limit, you can basically do whatever you want. And I mean, nobody knows when they're where the legal limit is on themselves, but it's
right. It's like riding a motorcycle, drinking and riding a motorcycle. It's just like I don't do it because I want to be absolutely 100% in charge of my wits when I'm
it's
riding my
easier
motorcycle.
on the bigger volunteer departments that have 40 or 50 members that you can say, okay, you 10 are on call this week or these 4 days or these evenings or this weekend or whatever. And then you feel less guilt if you're not on call and you go, okay, well, radio's off. I'm not going no matter what happens. And I've been there where I've been on the fire department and I was every 6-month period, I was one of the top 2 guys for attendance for calls. And I go to every single false alarm there ever was. And the one night that I have 2 beers, it's a working fire. And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? How does that work, right? But that's just the way she goes.
You don't want to be standing there explaining to some homeowner smelling of alcohol, and you couldn't save their house or their cat or whatever the case may be. You don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy that crashed the fire truck on the way there, explaining to the police and the family of the person you just killed and the fire chief why the truck's wrecked and all that stuff. Just if you're gonna drink, have fun. Don't come to the fire hall. That's what I.
Recommendation number 4, fire department should ensure that an accountability system is established prior to entry and personnel accountability reports are accurate. Personnel accountability system is designed and operated to ensure firefighters do not become lost or missing in the hazard zone. During this incident, the firefighter was unaccounted for and his location was unknown. The firefighter had yelled, "Get out," and got out of the kitchen before his crew. The rest of the crew got outside. They saw gear in a pack in the yard, thinking it was their members' gear. It was later determined that they did not have an accurate PAR check. Crew integrity was lost when the crew separated in the kitchen area. So stay together. You go in together, you come out together. The other thing is, I mean, accountability is really simple, guys. I mean, just some little, what do you call those? Laminated tags, a yellow one and a red one on your helmet and a board on the pump. And you give them the yellow one when you go to the call and you give them a red one if you go on air. And that way, at least we have a record of you somewhere at the scene outside that you're on air and if you're missing. I mean, it's not super hard to do.
There's a deeper issue here, though, and you pointed it out earlier when we were talking about identification of vehicles. This county system of fire departments does not work together at that level. You've got 2 engine ones on scene, a number of rescues in wildlands with the same number on scene. It's very difficult to have an accountability system that does not recognize unique identifications of vehicles and personnel. So when I ran a county system, we had 11 stations, and every station had a number, and every firefighter had their own accountability number, and they were 4-digit numbers, and they all started with the 2-digit station number and went forward with the 2 or 3-digit uniform number that came after that. And so you had a unique ID, and the name of your fire department, the county in this case, was on the tag, and every vehicle was uniquely identified. So you could actually have a proper accountability system because everything was unique. And you need to take that further because you need to also identify your radios and tie the radio to the firefighter. So if radio 4-60, radio's a mayday without identifying who they are, you need to know what uniform tag was carrying that radio to be able to tie it back together so that you know who to look for. And you need to track your assignments too.
Isn't that Chief Schreiner's thing from Comox, Gord Schreiner, Stop Bad? And that's his biggest thing is that everybody has to have an individual number, and that's the number they use all the time. You don't change numbers. I'm firefighter number 27, and I keep that for my life with that department because everybody knows that Paul is 27. And that's his big claim to fame. I don't know if he listens to our podcast, but he's gone around the country talking about that, and he calls it Stop Bad.
I do think that there should be some kind of system for identifying people, and it needs to make sense. right? I know a fire department that I was on that everybody had a number on their helmet, but there was no rhyme or reason why anybody had any number. Just you got a number, and then
Mine changed when I became the officer on crew 4. Mine changed to 4.
but there's a system there. I think I think there was there was a system of the officers. The firefighters was a complete free for all, and then
Yeah,
I
I
kind of
agree. Yeah.
brought up to the chief, how about we do this, and we made the numbers correspond to your rank and your crew. That worked for 2 years, and then someone said, I don't like Doug's idea, so it went back to being a complete free for all. So my question is, when you're the young, passionate firefighter that brings up, hey, I think we could do something here better, and you bring it up your chain of command, and the chiefs go, don't care, doesn't matter, whatever, and they don't do anything about it. What do you do then, right? It was brought up about crew numbers and people numbers and whatever. It was brought up about having 7 rescue ones all at the same fire. Nobody seemed to care. So then what do you do? What's your next step?
You go work on another fire department. That's what I did, where I could change it. And in Clearwater, there was all before I started. Every station was numbered. Every apparatus was numbered by type of apparatus and station. Every firefighter was numbered. Every door code was individual to each person, so you knew when they went in the hall. So I mean, we need to do, but these little details are important
Sure. Imagine
when this
imagine the fire
happens.
chief talking to this guy's family, trying to explain why they didn't know where he was because we couldn't agree on a numbering system. Think about that.
Yeah,
You got to put
exactly.
yourself sometimes in those situations
Yeah.
to understand why it's so important.
It's hard having an accountability system that is multi-departmental if you don't train on it beforehand, and everybody, you shouldn't be showing up to the Acme Fire Department when you're from their neighbor being like, okay, now we're in their area, let's work their way, right? You should be able to, if you're going to commonly work together, like you call us, we call you. Your chiefs can have lunch together one day and go, let's put our egos aside and let's don't make it, you don't have to do it Paul's way, and Paul doesn't have to do it Denny's way. Let's just come up with a new way that we can both do everything.
Yeah, no, I mean this is true. I have to commend like South Dakota. I mean, I know some fire chiefs in the Sioux Falls area and the rural Sioux Falls because of my connection with Rosenbauer, who builds fire trucks there. And I mean Sioux Falls, the city paid unionized department actually has automatic aid with all the departments around. And when the city has a big event, the rural departments send apparatus and man the stations in the city, which is unheard of here in Alberta. So they do have some really good systems, but then these are where these systems sometimes fall down in numbering and that kind of stuff. But being a regional chief, and Denis has as well, it's super hard to tell the station that you're not station 10 anymore. You're going to be station 11 when they've lived that for all their lives and that's their thing, and you're taking away our identity and all this kind of stuff. Yes, I know, but for the safety of our people, we need to get over these little hurdles. I don't care what color the truck is painted. I don't care what numbers on the truck as long as it has a number. I don't care what numbers on your helmet. I don't care what kind of helmet you wear. I mean, but let's get a system that makes sense for the bad days. Like,
Although it was kind of funny when we went from having absolutely no system to having a crew system, and then a few guys had their number tattooed on their arm, and now they had somebody else's number tattooed on their arm because their number changed.
It says there's some really large mutual aid systems, if I want to call it, like MBAS and the other one they use in the Phoenix area and so forth, where there's
that's automatic aid.
multiple fire departments work together, and somehow or other, they're not small volunteer departments, but somehow or other they've managed to recognize the essential truth that working together well is important to crew safety. It's important to health and safety. It's important to Mrs. Smith. And so at the end of the day, like Doug says, you got to bury your ego, man, and you got to look at what's most important. And if somebody doesn't want to play in the sandbox, great. You're not invited to our parties, and we're not coming to yours.
I mean, even
And that's how Brunacini made his name. And I repeat it again on this: he didn't make his name with Fire Command. That came after. The first thing he did was the Sun Valley. Let's all be one numbering system. Let's all be automatic aid. Mrs. Smith doesn't care whose name's on the door. We're all trying to do the same job. I remember asking the fire chief in Glendale, "Why are your trucks chrome yellow?" He says, "Because on the news every night you can see when the chrome yellow trucks are helping our neighbors because they're all red." And I says that's what we're here for. We're here to help everybody, and it just drives me that an automatic aid is the goal. Mutual aid is fine, but the captain shouldn't have to ask for it. It should be automatic. But we better get going here, Doug.
even the biggest fire department in North America had to deal with this numbering issue. I mean, when Brooklyn, the city of Brooklyn, joined the city of New York, there was a Brooklyn Fire Department Engine 1 and a New York Engine 1, and they said, "Okay, well, now Brooklyn, you're Engine 101." And when Manhattan or New York reached number 100, they said, "Okay, now we're going to change you to 201." So that's why in Brooklyn, all the fire companies are from 200 up, because they have a system that makes it work citywide.
And that's the beauty of having one administration.
When I took over one department, I had to renumber all the stations because it was 4 previous departments went together, and one station ended up being Station 11. The guy says, "Well, how come we can't be Station 1?" I says, "You are. You're Station 1, 1."
And there is a way that you can like integrate this into keeping the crew identity. I see lots of American places that are part of a metro area where like
you can.
my station number 1 is actually number 51, but like we kept the 1, we just added the region's 50 in front of it, kind of thing, right? So we're still number 1 of our department, but we're number 50 of the big department.
Got my rabbit ears on here because we're going down a rabbit hole. I like it.
And let them paint their favorite cartoon character on the door.
But if we can bring this back to the accountability thing we're talking about here. I mean, the number is not what got this guy messed up, but it's important as a crew officer to know if you have a par or not, especially when a par is asked for. Just because you see gear lying on the front lawn, you still got to find the guy that belongs to the gear if you think it's your guy. And it goes the other way too. There was a fire in Toronto that was part of a PowerPoint I was learning from, that a mayday was called. They're battling their asses off on the 15th floor of this high rise looking for firefighter Smith, and they're working, and then somebody goes, "Well, firefighter Smith's right beside me in the lobby here. He's fine." And then everybody can go, "Oh, well then let's not battle our asses off here. Let's retreat a little bit." So it works both ways. They need to know if you're not there, but they also need to know if you are there.
I also remember another incident where they got back to the fire hall and found one of the guys' cars in the parking lot, and that's when they recognized he was missing.
Well, and this was a problem in the Shirley Towers incident. I'm just looking up what episode that was, where because command changed 4 times in a short period of time, not always on the radio, not always face to face, they lost track of the people that were in the suite, and the suite had doors on 2 different floors, separated by another floor, and the SCBA accountability person lost track of them, and command lost track of them, and 2 firefighters died. Shirley Towers in the UK, Manchester, I think, was the city. We did the episode, but I'm trying to find it. I can't pull it up here right away. But I teach ICS, right? And accountability is one of the highest things, and transfer of command. And I use this example exactly why it's important.
Brutal, man.
My final thing on this presentation is it's just another example of like the numbers didn't matter, right? It's a little minor detail. When stuff went bad, when things went bad, then all the little details matter. So you have to iron out all the little details before things go bad, so that when they do, it doesn't matter anymore.
But we had over 30 firefighters on this scene, 33 in fact, and 2 EMS. Easy to lose track of somebody from 33 firefighters around a single house. Not hard to lose track.
Especially if they're not staying with their crews, which was always my pet peeve, is if you come with engine 3, you better be with engine 3 all the time. And that's why I went to the numbers on the SCBA. I couldn't get people to go for the numbers on the helmets like Phoenix and most of southern United States do. But I went with the number identifiers on every SCBA. It had which engine the SCBA came off of. So I could see from my command truck sitting outside, if engine 231 had one guy with them from engine 235, I knew they were out of place. So it wasn't expensive. They're little Nomex or PBI covers. One goes on the front of the SCBA, one goes on the tank at the back, and that way, anytime there's an SCBA, I know whose it is.
Number 5, fire departments should ensure that a respiratory protection program is established and maintained. Firefighting is a physically and psychologically demanding occupation that requires strength, physical agility, and endurance, as well as the ability to operate effectively with the limitations from SCBA, or self-contained breathing apparatus, and other personal protective equipment. During the interview process, it was established that many of the volunteer fire departments did not have the funding or resources to adequately establish or maintain a respiratory protection program.
No comments on that?
Well, they did find out. I think it's later. They say that the personal accountability system, the personal alert, did not work. The batteries were. They think the batteries may have been dead at the time of the call.
So recommendation 6, fire departments should ensure that SCBA are functional and maintained in accordance with manufacturer guidelines. So the following standards address the maintenance and use of self-contained breathing apparatus and personal alert safety systems, so the PAS and the SCBA we're talking about here. And most modern systems, they're integrated, they're together, right? But they're battery operated. I think in modern SCBA, you've got 2 or 3 different places where batteries are required, right? So batteries are like,
yes.
I remember the old ones where there was practically nothing to the SCBA, let alone the batteries. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you about the standards that apply here. So NFPA 1981, I don't know that these are still the current standards. There's been the standard on open circuit self-contained breathing apparatus for emergency services. NFPA 1852, standard on care, selection, maintenance of open circuit self-contained breathing apparatus. NFPA 1500, standard on fire department occupational safety and health programs. So 1500 is kind of the catch-all health and safety for firefighters and refers back to a lot of other standards. 81 is the standard to which what air packs are designed to. In 1852 is how you should look after them. In Canada, there are 2 other standards that are actually, generally speaking, legislated through provincial occupational health and safety laws. And those 2 standards are certainly ones that, for our Canadian listeners, if you are not familiar with and are not using, you're probably going to end up in trouble if one of your people gets hurt or killed with an air pack. And that's the CSA Z181.1, which is compressed breathing air and systems, which is basically regulates the source of the breathing air, and CSA Z94.4, which is the selection, use, and care of respirators. So Z94.4 is the one that prohibits beards, by the way. For those who think that there isn't a standard for that, there absolutely is, and generally speaking, it's in law. So again, I mentioned that. So, and the NFPA standards are generally speaking very good guidelines for most fire departments. NFPA 1981 is how the SCBA is actually tested and manufactured, but how you use it, there's good guidelines on how to do that. You need to have an entire respiratory protection program, and you need to have one person who's essentially in charge of that. It doesn't have to be crazy or anything like that, but like Paul says, you got to know all your packs, how they're serviced, how they're tested, who's looking after them, that you're doing competent field services and so forth. Then there's 1989 Standard on Breathing Air Quality for emergency services, and that's the one I said that in Canada is Z180.1. So at this incident, it was reported to NIOSH investigators, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, that the PAS device may have been non-operational, I guess it's on the firefighter who died, due to batteries not being replaced when needed. So part of your SCBA program would ensure that you're checking those batteries on a regular, I think it's at least every 6 months, and maybe even more often, because air packs require a regular inspection, I guess I would say. Due to the extreme heat conditions the fallen firefighters SCBA encountered, it is uncertain whether this was a contributing factor in the incident.
Might not have been able to find them, but would it have worked anyway?
Plus, there was a lot of water in the basement. They had to pump the basement out, I believe, at one point. So there's
Yeah,
all kinds of
yeah.
things there, right?
You might not have been able to find them, but it might have given you an earlier warning that somebody was missing and down.
We used to change them every 6 months just to avoid, because they would kind of last almost a year. But so we just changed them every 6 months, and it was a routine thing.
Depends how many calls you go to, depends how often you power them up, depends on all kinds of things, right?
I didn't want to risk it, so we just changed them. Fire departments should also ensure that firefighters wear proper PPE on the fire ground. A firefighter's responsibility is to maintain physical and mental readiness to handle situations that they are often inherently dangerous. In this incident, firefighters were fighting the fire outside the structure without their full ensemble of PPE and SCBA. And sometimes there's that guy on YouTube, the firefighter critique, and he'll often pull up videos where the officer, speaking from an officer's perspective, we're typically the most abusive of that one, not doing up our jacket, not putting our hood on, not putting our pants on, not wearing our SCBA when we're in an apartment building on fire, right, Doug? That was me.
I don't want to be hard on volunteer firefighters, but you see pictures all over the place all the time of volunteer firefighters with full beards, and they're on the fire department and whatever. And like, hey, but you can't wear an SCBA with that. Oh, that doesn't matter. I don't go inside. Well, you might like the rule doesn't. It drives me nuts. It's one of my pet peeves because either you're on the fire department or you're not, kind of thing. And yeah, you might not be the one crawling down the hallway doing an interior attack, but what are you going to do when you're doing an exterior has to be in the smoke, or when this kind of thing happens and you got to get in there or whatever? So that does kind of bother me. So
You're running the pump and the smoke's coming across. I mean, you got to think about cancer. Honestly, you do. And probably the least worn piece of safety gear of any firefighter is their gloves. And I see firefighters, career and volunteer, all the time, stretching lines, operating lines, handling tools. They don't have their gloves on. Well, I can't do this properly with my gloves on. The reason you can't do it properly with your gloves on is because you don't train with your gloves on. That's why. If you trained with your gloves on, you'd understand how to use them. And that was always one of my pet peeves. I'd have guys come in, say, I cut my hand. I'd say, well, where's the cut in your glove? Oh, I don't have a cut in my glove. Well, that tells me a lot. So, it's a cultural thing.
Yep, you're right. Fire department should ensure that staging area manager is assigned to the staging area to release crews once assignments are given. During fireground operations, the incident commander may need a resource beyond the resources that are already operating on the fireground. At this incident, companies were requested on additional alarms, reported to the staging area, and staged their apparatus. But the companies walked directly to the scene. When command identifies a task that needs done, command chooses the proper resources, confirms their availability, and then orders them into action. Managing incident operations in this fashion is how the incident management system coordinates and incorporates all the efforts of multiple units into a single cohesive operation. According reported to command. Then it is then, without an assignment, started performing fireground tasks. At this incident, companies were requested on additional alarms, reported to staging and staged, but they walked into the scene, reported to command, and then without an assignment, started performing fireground tasks. And this happens in so many incidents that we look at that we don't follow this crew accountability and the incident command system, in that you wait until you're assigned, and which then command doesn't know what he's got. Like we mentioned Brunacini again. I mention it every time I teach an ICS course. His famous words were, if you don't have staging, you don't have command. If they're not in staging, you really don't know what you got or what you don't
And
got.
staging is not a
So
place.
that's just
Staging is part of a method. You need to have
it's a
you need
status.
to have an officer in charge of that sector, and he's the guy who makes sure that he knows exactly who you've brought, what their skills are. We had a number of 4 probationary firefighters, I think, on this particular scene, a couple EMS people. There was probably somebody there from the hydroelectric service. There certainly was one police officer, maybe more. So there's a bunch of people that need corralling. You need to know who they are, and you need to keep a rein on them through staging if necessary, if they're anxious to run off and freelance, which is, by the way, what that's called.
And at a bigger incident, staging and rehab are two different things. You go from one to the other. And on a mutual aid incident with companies like this, departments like this, the fire ground is not the time to figure out your staging protocol. Figure it out beforehand so that it all flows smoothly when you get there.
You got to learn how to number your trucks, though.
Well, it's easier for the staging area manager when he just says, well, engine one's here. And that means there's 250 guys standing there with a one on their helmet. Anyways, number 9, the last one. Local government should consider requiring firefighters to be trained to state minimum training requirements or provincial minimum training requirements. State training standards have been established to increase competency and reliability of fire service personnel, improve and expand the professional training available to fire service personnel by developing uniform minimum standards for basic in-service, advanced in-service, and promotional supervisory training programs, with emphasis on proper subject content and better instruction. The South Dakota Fire Marshal Office oversees and coordinates the fire service training program. The State Fire School offers firefighter 1 and 2 pre-certification training that most local departments always require. In this incident, 48 of the 53 firefighters were state certified to IFSTA Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 standard. The county's Fire Chiefs Association was helping to provide formal training to the IFSTA Firefighter 1 and 2 standards, but there was no county or municipality regulatory requirement at the time of this incident. I completely agree that there should be minimum standards on fire departments, but I can see now if any jurisdiction had said, Kate, you have to train to this level now as a basic minimum, the response is going to be like, sounds good, pay for it, and we'll do it. And that's where it all falls apart.
Where the rubber meets the road.
It's surprising, though, they don't really talk about mandated incident command systems either, because clearly, to me, in this incident, there was an incident management system missing. They didn't seem to be there. If you don't have accountability, I'm not sure you can have an incident management system. So I thought in the U.S. you could get federal funding if you followed NFIRES, for instance, and were required to meet a certain standard of incident command and so forth. I thought that was a source. Yeah, I thought that was a source for funding and was an incentive to get involved in that.
It is. It's legislation in the states that they use the incident command system and the national incident management system to get recovery funding, usually for disasters. It's actually legislation in Alberta now too. Municipalities must use the incident command system to activate their municipal emergency plan, and if they don't use it, they may not get disaster recovery funding for a larger event. So actually, they're strengthening that legislation here in Alberta.
So there's nothing really similar in Canada, certainly not on a national level.
Not nationally, no, because there's no national.
I think that's a problem. No. We were doing that in Ontario 15 years ago, 20 years ago almost. We were talking about mandating it, but the government never pulled the trigger on that. They just didn't have the wherewithal to tell people what to do. Mm-hmm. Even I'd suggested, well, bribe them with funding, and people would be more willing to undertake that. And I think that's an important part, and might go towards, helping to prevent firefighter deaths and injuries. And a better.
It might not be all that possible. It might not be all that possible in the environments we live in now at a provincial level, but I know, like in Lacombe, there it can certainly happen at a regional level. The county funds most of the fire departments, and the county can easily say, "Here's what you got to do, and if you don't do it, we'll do it for you." But they choose not.
Well, I'm involved in a.
They choose not to do it though. They just hope nothing goes wrong, and when it goes wrong, they'll worry about it then.
I'm doing a big project for a municipality here in Alberta that had a wildfire event and evacuation and all that kind of stuff, and their people weren't trained. Guess what they're doing now? Everybody's taking ICS 100, 200. I'm doing 300 in 2 weeks or 400 in 2 weeks. We've trained a whole bunch of people because they've realized. And the chief, actually, I think I mentioned on the podcast before, the chief says, my firefighters all want to get ICS like up to 300 at least. And I'm going, that's kind of high for firefighters. Usually officers, maybe, but 200 for most people. He says, I know. But after the event, they really struggled understanding why they were being told to do what they were being told. They need to understand the system. Once they understand the system, and we've been training them, and they're going like, aha, oh yeah, this is great. We need to use this all the time. Exactly. We need to do an incident briefing form for every call.
So one of the challenges we have here in Nova Scotia is that volunteer fire departments, and in fact, all fire departments that aren't municipal departments. So in other words, if you're not in a city where the municipality is actually running the fire department, all fire departments are independent corporations. And most of them elect their officers every single year, including their fire chief. Every year they have an election. So it's very difficult to have continuity of skills. So these private corporations elect their fire chiefs, and once they elect their fire chiefs, the provincial fire marshal just accepts that verdict, and they now have all the statutory powers that come with being a fire chief. And one of them is a requirement to know the legislation and to be responsible for doing fire investigations and fire reporting, and to be in command and to have authority over, walking onto property and destroying property and all those things. And the question is, are you trained? Are you capable of doing that? Do you have ICS 300? Do you have an incident command system that everybody follows? When were you trained? Well, there isn't time to get trained to those levels and to be capable fully in your 1 year tenure. So what it does is it creates, like, it's worse than municipal councils who at least have a 4 year horizon. You're down to a 1 year horizon, and I think that's not unusual nationally. That type of an approach, that you don't have the longer vision to move yourself towards addressing some of these issues, and I think that's a problem.
We do have less of that in the West. There's less of the elected fire chiefs and stuff like that in Western Canada. It's been kind of going away. But in Eastern North America, that's still very much the case, especially, in the Eastern Canadian provinces, I think. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another emergency traffic podcast. We appreciate your interest and hope you continue to find them interesting and informative. Give us a star, a like, or a thumbs up. These mean a lot to us and the algorithms for people to learn about our growing podcast. You can follow us on social media, Twitter or X as it's known now, Facebook page, or you can email us at the emergencytrafficpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Let's be safe out there. Any last words from my co-hosts?
Train to save your life.
Yeah.
I'll say it in honor of Dirk, who is still a co-host of this show, but has not been around for a while. Yeah, he needs to listen to his wife more, according to him, as we all probably do. But stay low and go.
I love it. Perfect. Excellent.